For the 2024-2025 Edmonton Oilers, the NHL playoffs are a chance at redemption, a chance at proving the doubters wrong, and a chance at history.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this morning of Game 1 edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. First full season as host of Locked On Oilers in the books, my third NHL season with the Locked On Podcast Network. And I want to thank everyone that is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On today's very jam-packed Game 1 of the Oilers-Kings series edition of Locked On Oilers, we have a whole lot to get to. We're going to start out with the keys to the series stylistically, what the Oilers are going to need to do from a gameplay perspective. Then we will pivot to a conversation about how the Oilers should try and approach this series defensively without Matthias Ekholm, questions as to whether or not Troy Stecher will be available at some point, ditto for John Klingberg, and then we'll tie a bow on today's show talking about the journey, the test, and the opportunity that lies ahead. So at the outset, you saw a little bit of the juice yesterday. You saw some playoff hockey. You saw two different types of games. That Jets and Blues game was very back and forth. The Blues were very much game. And then you saw the Stars and the Avalanche, where the Avs controlled a good chunk of that game. The Stars got in the game, but as it wore down, the Avs were really able to dissect and pick the Stars apart. And we're going to get two more games in today, Sunday, as of the time of this recording. The Devils and Hurricanes are dropping the puck in about an hour and a half. But one of the real curiosities I always have when it comes to a playoff series, especially with teams who have familiarity, which this format leads to, where you're going to play a team you play 4 times in the regular season again in the playoffs, unless you're a wild card team, and then in which case it could be 3, it could be 2, it depends. But the big question I have, if I'm the Oilers, how are we going to go about getting the most out of our opportunities? Because by definition, the way the Los Angeles Kings like to play hockey is low event. They want to try and bring the speed of the game down. They want to slow the game down. And they really want to force you to work for your offense because they have talented individual players. We talked about it on the crossover edition last Friday with Eddie Garcia. Quinn Byfield is probably the Kings' most dynamic player. Kevin Fiala and Adrian Kempe are good in transition. They're really good counterattacking wingers. And we'll get to how the Oilers can try and mitigate some of that Kings counterattack in a minute. But by and large, these two teams are going to be in direct contrast with each other, how they want to play, what they want to do. The Oilers, if the Oilers are smart, their goal is going to be to try and raise the octane, raise the temperature, and force the Kings to skate. Because even though the Oilers are not a particularly fast team anymore, you really are feeling the absences of Holloway, of Ryan McLeod, and of Warren Fogle in this series. But at the very least, the Oilers do have some dynamic ability in their lineup in a way the Kings don't. And when you have that dynamic ability, it's incumbent upon you as a coach to maximize their output. What does that typically mean for the Oilers? It usually means getting Evan Bouchard out there with Connor McDavid as frequently as often as possible. Sometimes you're going to get Bouchard out there with Draisaitl, and then sometimes you're going to get all three of them out there together. But for the Oilers to be successful in this series in particular, the biggest key for me is going to be the Oilers maximizing their offense. And there's a few ways to go about that. As we've discussed a ton over the last month or so, the Oilers aren't as much of a transition offense anymore because they don't have as much raw foot speed. So they do have to work a little bit harder to create offense. You have to cycle. You have to get the puck up to the point. You have to look for redirects. You have to look for deflections. You have to crash the net. And the problem with that is the Oilers don't really have those net front guys. Other than Zach Hyman, who is still an above average net front player, they don't have an overwhelming forecheck. Sure, Podkolzin is probably their best raw forechecker, but that's where the injuries and the conversation about, well, what does Evander Kane bring? What does Trent Frederick bring? That's where you can start to talk me into, well, the Oilers can play a few different styles throughout their lineup. And ultimately, I feel like that's your goal. If you want to go as far as the Oilers are going to try and go this year, that you want to try and avenge last year, you want to win the Stanley Cup, you are going to need a little bit of everything. You are going to need some rush offense. You're going to need some cycle offense. You're going to need special teams. You're going to need 5-on-5 play. And yes, at some point, you will need above average goaltending. But I do want to say it's imperative the Oilers avoid falling into the trap, because the Kings are going to want to play this game in a slog. They're going to want to turn this into a dump and chase, let the Oilers skate around the perimeter of the zone, hold on to the puck for long periods of time, and look for one good chance. And I feel a little hypocritical saying this, but pretty much everything I am saying as far as style doesn't apply to Connor and Leon. Whatever Connor and Leon want to do as far as chance creation, setting up line mates, take chances themselves, that's a little bit different, because you don't want to box your dynamic guys in. But at large, we've talked a ton this season about how the supporting cast hasn't really lived up to expectations. This is a golden opportunity. The Oilers last year in the playoffs weren't great at 5-on-5. They were a +1 goal differential over the course of the entire playoffs at 5-on-5. Special teams is where they dominated. They had one of the best playoff penalty kills ever, and their power play was humming. It was mid-20s, low 30s percentages at various points during the postseason. And the power play is 10th in the NHL this year, which isn't bad, but it's not great. And the depth hasn't been as good this year as it was last year. So you start to think about the math and how do we get to 3? How do we get to 4? How do we get to 5 goals against a stingy team with a goalie who's pretty good in Darcy Kemper, who had a really good bounce back year this year for the Kings. So stylistically, that means maximizing our strengths. That means putting emphasis on challenging the Kings defenders, whether that's Ben Sherratt, whether that's Drew Doughty, putting their guys in positions where they need to make plays. I also think by default, that means you have to play Jeff Skinner with Connor McDavid. And I know Chris Knobloch hasn't been the biggest fan of what Jeff Skinner's brought to the Oilers this year, but he's one of their best finishers. He is one of their best straight line skaters. And if you are going to maximize what Connor McDavid brings, you need to put him with players who thrive in transition. So if you put Skinner on his left, Hyman on his right, that means you're going to have Nuge as the third line center and Adam Henrique as the fourth line center, more likely than not. Okay, so what does that mean for the rest of our lineup? Well, we probably play Evander Kane with Draisaitl. Maybe we play Trent Frederick with Draisaitl. Okay, then on the right side, you're probably going to play Arvidsson with Draisaitl. Okay, and the lineup starts to take its shape. And the Oilers have played things very close to the chest as far as who's going to play, who's available, who's healthy, who's not. And it's every bit to their advantage that the Kings don't know what they're going to do. Some of it is gamesmanship, but some of it is actual strategy. And I do think the one last point I want to get in here on style and just the feeling of the series, I think it's really important that if Chris Knobloch can help it, he doesn't play Connor and Leon together unless it's dire. Because the second you load up that one line with Hyman, the rest of your lineup dramatically loses its ability to play with tempo, to play in transition, because you need to distribute Connor and Leon throughout the lineup so they can carry more. And yes, in a pinch, you're going to go to that. In a pinch, the Oilers will have Connor, Leon, Hyman, Bouchard, and Jake Walman out there. That is going to be the 5-man, we need a goal group. And it's a great luxury to have that type of talent and be able to load up a singular unit to go after that goal you need, whether it's to tie or to win the game. But that does put an incredible amount of stress on the rest of your lineup, which I don't think this group in particular's depth is capable of mitigating. We are going to take our first break of today's edition of Locked On Oilers. But when we return, we're going to talk about how the Oilers are going to divide up their defense, who's going to play with who's even available, and a whole lot more. So be sure to stick around to this edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. The Stanley Cup playoffs are here, and if you have never been to a live NHL playoff game, it's a life-altering experience. The intensity, the speed, and the energy, it's all next level. And thanks to Game Time, getting in the door is easier and more affordable than ever. Game Time is the fastest way to grab playoff tickets, even for those must-see matchups. Prices actually drop as puck drop gets closer, and with last-minute deals, you can save as much as 60% off. Game Time's all-in pricing shows the total cost up front. There are no surprise fees at checkout. The app even shows you a panoramic seat view, so you know exactly what you're getting before you buy. And with Game Time ticket coverage, I know I'm protected, whether it's a cancellation, job loss assurance, or their 24-hour return guarantee. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, one more time. That's code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Game 1 edition of Locked On Oilers. And of course, we will have an episode out as soon as Game 1 ends Monday night into Tuesday morning. I will be sure to be on top of things as far as the content flow goes at this most crucial time of the year. And as we talked about in that first segment, this series is going to be direct conflict in terms of what each team wants to do and how they're going to go about doing that. And a concern I do have, and I was talking with one of my friends about this on Sunday morning, we were going back and forth texting as far as how you would attack this, as far as putting your lineup together as Knobloch with guys at less than 100%, not knowing when certain guys are going to be available. Do you want to try and distribute your risk throughout your lineup evenly and hope your good players can cancel out your less talented players? Or do you want to try and load up the best parts of your team and then deal with the consequences of that later? Because there are two ways to think about it. If you distribute risk more evenly throughout your lineup, the chances are you're going to have slightly lower event, slightly less volatile overall game action, which means there's less opportunity for things to get out of whack. But because there are fewer total opportunities for things to go weird, each individual sequence or event becomes more valuable. So think about this in terms of basic percentages. In a game where there's 40 shots on goal total between both teams, each of those is worth 1/40th. If there's only 25 shots on goal in the whole game, and there will be more than 25 shots on goal in a game, most of the time each team will have at least 25, but we're doing basic math to keep things simple. 1 out of 25 is a lot bigger than 1 out of 40. That's the way you need to think about a low event game that the Kings are going to want to play. Does that help the Oilers? In some respects, yes. If you play a lower event game, that means Connor and Leon get to have greater influence on those fewer overall number of plays. Of course, there's less margin for error in those situations. We talk about this a ton in professional football, in the NFL. When 4 or 5 years ago, when the Chiefs were really exploding offensively, when they had Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, and they were putting up high 20s, low 30s almost every single week, the prevailing wisdom that prognosticators and experts would give is that you want to run the ball. You want to reduce the total number of possessions in the game so that the Chiefs can only get the ball X number of times throughout the course of the game. Does that help lower the overall score? Yes. But it does enable someone like Patrick Mahomes with then Tyreek Hill to make that one play all the more valuable. And even if you hold them to 6 or 7 possessions, if they score on 4 of the 6 or 7 possessions, did you really shorten the game? Did you really play better defense? Well, no, because you still didn't end up stopping them in the opportunities that you needed to stop them. And that's the conundrum the Oilers are going to have here. Because if they fall into the trap of trying to play this game on the Kings' terms, it's going to take away some of what makes the Oilers' offense compelling. It's going to take away some of the danger. And yes, I know there are people listening to this right now who say, Nick, aren't you tired of the Evan Bouchard turnovers at the blue line? Aren't you tired of the drop passes to nobody at the blue line immediately upon entering the zone? Yes, I am. I think the Oilers need to be a bit more strategic in their risk taking, but it is absolutely imperative that the Oilers continue to push, continue to be aggressive, and try to make the Kings uncomfortable, because that's generally how these series shake out. The longer they go on, the team that's on their heels more often is going to end up wilting, and eventually that's going to be the deciding factor in the game. That's why I brought up the Stars-Avs game. The Avs had the puck a ton. The Stars were on their heels a ton. It was only 2-1 when they scored that empty net goal to make it 3-1. And then the Avs just kept pouring on as the Stars kept pulling the goalie. And that's how quick it goes. And in a playoff series, you only get so many opportunities. And as far as the Oilers defense, no Ekholm is a blow. It is a gut punch. It is a really difficult set of circumstances to overcome. And that's before we even get to who's going to play with who's available, and things of that nature. Ekholm is one of the best defensive defensemen in the entire NHL. And part of the reason the Oilers struggled so much in the second half of the regular season post start of February is that Ekholm was hurt. And when he did play, he wasn't that effective. When he didn't play, the defense at large was even less effective. So no Ekholm for the entire first round is really going to be an uphill battle. If the Oilers are going to make any type of prolonged, sustained run to a conference final, a Stanley Cup final, they are going to need Ekholm back as soon as possible, because Ekholm is going to unlock more from Evan Bouchard, and that is going to deepen the lineup. So right now, as we sit here, my assumption is that the Oilers are going to run some combination of Evan Bouchard, Jake Walman, Darnell Nurse, and Brett Kulak as their top four. That is not the most confidence-inspiring group. And again, it is Sunday morning as of the time of this recording, so we don't know as far as who's available. We do know for a fact that Mattias Ekholm is not. We do know for a fact that Troy Stecher did not travel to LA after skating in Edmonton on Saturday. So that tells you you have no Stecher, you have no Ekholm. Could we see John Klingberg? Possibly. But as of the moment, you should probably expect to see Evan Bouchard, Jake Walman, Darnell Nurse, Brett Kulak. Then from there, I don't know what that third pair is going to look like. Probably Ty Emberson with Troy Stecher, maybe by game 2 or 3. But without knowing who's available, you have questions. I think ideally you probably play Walman with Bouchard, you play Kulak with Nurse, and you play Emberson with whoever you think is the 6th best defenseman you have access to. If you think that's Klingberg, God forbid if you think that's Josh Brown, if you think that's Cam Dineen, whoever you want the Oilers to play there, it's not going to be a very confidence-inspiring pairing. They're going to get maybe 15, 14 minutes in the game. Bouchard, Nurse, Kulak, they're all going to be north of 26, 27 minutes a night in these playoffs, because the Oilers do not have a bottom pairing right now. They fundamentally don't have the bodies, and you need Stecher back ASAP. Not even because I think Troy Stecher is great, just because he's better than the alternatives. You don't want to see Josh Brown in a playoff series. I don't know if you want to see Cam Dineen in a playoff series. These are real question marks the Oilers have. And if we're going to go on the theory that the Oilers need to maximize their opportunities and maximize their offense, Walman's their second best offensive defenseman. Bouchard is their best offensive defenseman. Are they going to struggle in zone? Are they going to lose at the net front? Are they going to lose puck battles? Yes, they are. That's just not the strengths of their game. But your hope in playing them together is that you are going to get the puck a whole lot more. You're going to get the puck to McDavid and Hyman a whole lot more. And that's going to create more offense overall. We are going to take our second and final break of today's show. When we come back, I'm just going to wax poetically about the beauty of the NHL playoffs. I will see you guys in a second. Be sure to stick around to this edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. Did you know your Fire TV also doubles as an Xbox? Turn any TV into a gaming and entertainment hub with a Fire TV Stick 4K device. No console required. Grab a paired controller and subscribe or sign in to an existing Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with EA Play account included, and you're ready to go. Dive into hundreds of titles from EA Sports College Football 25, which I spent an ungodly amount of time playing last year, Call of Duty Black Ops 6, which rekindled my fire for the Call of Duty franchise, as easily as you stream or watch your favorite shows. It's gaming made simple, and it's all on your Fire TV. With 4K streaming, you can watch more than 1.5 million movies and TV episodes from your favorite subscription services like Netflix, Prime Video, Disney Plus Max, and so much more. Play high-quality Xbox games at the fraction of a cost of a console, or if you already have a console, a Fire TV Stick 4K device is so much easier to travel with instead of bringing your console around. Head to Amazon.com/FireTV locked on to get started. Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription and compatible controller are required. Available on select devices, including Fire TV Stick 4K 2nd Gen, Fire TV Stick 4K Max 1st and 2nd Gen, and Fire TV Cube 3rd Gen. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this first episode of the Stanley Cup playoffs on the Locked On Oilers feed. And look, the beauty of sports and why narratively it's so compelling, everything is in front of you now. You just played 82 regular season games to get here. We've culled the herd from 32 to 16. You are in the top half of the league. The Oilers are expected to win this series. Not convincingly, not nearly as it's been the last few times. Sorry about that. Words are hard. The last few times these teams have met, the Oilers had home ice advantage. They were expected to win. This year, the Oilers do not have home ice advantage for the first time in the first round in the McDavid-Draisaitl era. They are reeling to some degree going into the playoffs, dealing with a slew of injuries, players that are going to be entering the lineup at less than 100%, or in the case of Trent Frederick and Evander Kane, extremely rusty. They are coming into the playoffs with a goaltending tandem, I should say, that does not inspire confidence. They have the worst statistics of any goaltending tandem in the postseason. And in spite of all of that, you sit down, you look at the lineup, you see 97 and you see 29, and you think they can do this. You saw Draisaitl on one leg beat these Kings 2 years ago. On one leg, Leon Draisaitl was the best goal scorer in the first round of the playoffs. The Oilers are capable of just about anything when you have players of this caliber. The fact you have multiple players of this caliber unlocks so many opportunities. Doesn't mean you have to be perfect down the lineup. No, in fact, it gives you more margin for error. The question then becomes, and the challenge becomes, how much is too much in terms of what you're asking of Connor and Leon? Because they are capable of a whole lot. We have seen the Oilers drag middling teams. We have seen Connor and Leon drag middling Oiler teams with poor roster compositions, weak goaltending, poor defense, bad depth through a first round. We've seen them fare okay in more meaningful rounds. But as you sit here entering a playoff with some nervous optimism is the way I would describe it. I don't feel a whole ton of confidence in this Oilers team. That's in part because we don't know who's going to play in this game today, which is a cause for concern. We'll probably get an idea of lines and pairs at morning skate, just being that the Oilers have had extended time off. You're going to do a morning skate before game one. You won't do a morning skate every day between games going forward, especially on game days, but it is helpful now to see who's going to play with who and give you an idea of what to expect, because not knowing what to expect is both nerve-wracking and exhilarating. There's a world where the Oilers, because of the rest they've been able to accumulate down the backstretch, because they made the decision to rest guys, come out with a little bit of extra juice. They're able to get off to a strong start. They're able to win one of the first two and get a split in LA, which feels kind of essential. And this is not breaking news. The Oilers are going to need to win at least one road game in this series. As the team that does not have home ice, you need to win at least one road game. So, do you think it's more beneficial to split here, games 1 and 2, win game 5, the swing game, or game 7? Obviously, the answer, you want to win game 7, but ideally, you don't want to have to get to a game 7 to begin with. It is very challenging to ultimately go on and capture the Stanley Cup if you go 7-6 in the first 2 rounds. You want to be in that low 20s as far as games played. That's your sweet spot. The Panthers won the Stanley Cup last year in 25 games. that was on the higher end as far as recent Stanley Cup winners. The Lightning, the Avalanche, the Golden Knights, 21, 22, somewhere in that sweet spot where you get a 5-er in the first round, a 6 in the second, a 7-gamer in the third, and then in the Cup final, you win in 6 or 7. And it's a real advantage to get things wrapped up early. And I don't think the Oilers are in a position where they're going to win this series in 5 games. I think there's a world where they could, definitely in 6. But by and large, your goals here, if you're the Oilers, you have a great opportunity to reset because those previous 82 games, we're wiping the slate clean now. And I do think it's important, and I wanted to say this earlier and I forgot until right now and I jogged my memory. I think it's really important that Chris Knobloch embraces that clean slate mentality of the playoffs. Yeah, you have guys you trust and you like based on your prior experiences with them. You know, Janmark and Connor Brown in particular come to mind there. If Jeff Skinner's out there and playing well in this series, you got to ride it. You got to reward him for that. If Victor Arvidsson is playing well, you reward that. Henrique, ditto. Brett Kulak, ditto. Emberson, ditto. Corey Perry, ditto. And I know teams are reluctant to ride the hot hand at times because they want to dance with what brought you. You want to go back to what got you there in the first place. And that's one of the real challenges in sports from a leadership position. Because as a leader, you have made decisions based on your experiences, based on what you know. And by and large, if that's made you successful, it's going to be very difficult for you to go against your instincts, because if you trust your instincts, you go back to the idea that your instincts are what got you there in the first place. So if that's the case, why would I change what I've been doing? But in the course of a playoff run, you need to be thinking on your feet as quick as you possibly can, because you don't have time to wait things out. You know, if you're riding well and your lines are playing well and the goal split's just not going your way, you know, you're controlling possession, you're creating dangerous offense, you can't afford to wait 2 or 3 games to let your offense get going the same way you can in January or February. And I think it's important that the Oilers keep an open and active mind as far as lineup formulation. I think we are going to see a lot of moving parts, especially in the early stages of this series, as the Oilers look to integrate several players who haven't played in the course of a few weeks. I'm very curious to see how Leon Draisaitl looks after not playing for pretty much the entire month of April, other than the first half of that game against the Kraken. So the Oilers have a lot of decisions to make. There are a ton of moving parts to evaluate, but that will do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. I will talk to you guys immediately after game number 1 of the series against the LA Kings for instant reaction and analysis. Thank you so much for making Locked On Oilers your first listen of the day. During the NHL playoffs, be sure to check out NHL Game Night, giving live instant reaction as soon as the last game of the night goes final, covering the games of the night with local expertise of Locked On. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Until then, let's go Oilers.